I'm done, Aisha. We're done. Gavin's voice sliced through the sterile air of the hospital room, his hand gripping the divorce papers as he stood beside Victoria Whitmore. His wealthy, white boss, her smirk a silent taunt. Aisha, a black biotech visionary, lay gripped by labor pains, her world shattering as her husband abandoned her for a glittering promise of power. Their unborn son, Malik, was moments from arrival, yet Gavin chose Victoria's empire over his family. Grace, Aisha's unyielding mother, and Jamal, her trusted colleague, would become her anchors in the storm ahead. Betrayal stung, but Aisha's strength was just awakening. Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Share below to join this journey of resilience and triumph. The rain lashed against the hospital window, a thousand tiny fists demanding entry. Aisha's knuckles blanched as she gripped the bed's steel rails, her breath hitching in sharp, uneven bursts. Each contraction rolled through her like a tide, relentless, pulling her under. Her lips parted, a silent cry trapped in her throat as sweat beaded along her brow, tracing paths down her temples to mingle with the damp curls clinging to her skin. She was a fortress under siege, her body a battlefield, and yet her eyes darted to the man by the window. Gavin, her husband, his silhouette carved against the flickering neon glow. His phone's light bathed his face, casting shadows that sharpened the angle of his jaw. His thumbs danced across the screen, urgent, secretive, as if the words he typed held more weight than the life stirring within her. Gavin, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread stretched taut. No response. His shoulders stiffened, but his eyes never left the glass. Another contraction seized her, a fist tightening around her spine. She bit her lip, tasting salt and iron, and forced her gaze to the ceiling, counting the tiles to anchor herself. 1, 2, 3. Her breath shuddered out. She was alone in this. She knew it, even with him standing mere feet away. The air in room 204 was thick with antiseptic and something heavier, something unspoken that pressed against her chest. Gavin, please, she tried again. Louder, her voice cracking like thin ice. He glanced up, his hazel eyes fleetingly meeting hers before sliding back to the phone. I'm here, Aisha, he said, his tone flat, practiced, like a line rehearsed for a play he didn't care to perform. Just breathe, like the nurse said. The words landed like stones. Just breathe, as if she could will the pain away. As if his indifference wasn't a blade twisting deeper than the contractions. Her nails dug into her palms, leaving crescent moons in her skin. She wanted to scream, to demand he look at her, really look, but another wave crashed through her, stealing her voice. The nurse, a woman with gray-streaked braids and a no-nonsense gaze, adjusted the monitor beside the bed. Her eyes flicked to Gavin, sharp as a scalpel. Sir, she needs you present, not on that phone. Her voice was a low warning, cutting through the hum of machines. Gavin's lips curved into a tight smile, the kind he flashed at clients to mask impatience. I'm handling something. Won't take long. He didn't look at the nurse or at Aisha. His fingers kept moving, tapping out a rhythm that belonged to someone else. Aisha's chest tightened, not from the labor, but from the weight of his absence. She knew that rhythm, that distracted cadence. It was the same one he'd used for months, ever since Victoria Whitmore, his boss, started texting him after hours. Victoria, with her tailored suits and commanding presence, her name dropping into their conversations like a pebble in still water, rippling Aisha's peace. She'd never met the woman, but her shadow loomed large, woven into Gavin's late nights and vague excuses. Another contraction hit, fiercer, forcing a gasp from her lips. She closed her eyes, willing herself to focus on the life inside her, not the one unraveling beside her. Her hands trembled as they clutched the rails, her heart beat a drum in her ears, drowning out the rain. She was strong. She had to be. For Malik, the name she'd chosen in quiet moments, whispering it to her belly when Gavin was too busy to notice. The phone buzzed again, a sharp vibration that seemed to jolt Gavin's posture. His head tilted, a faint smile tugging at his lips, one Aisha hadn't seen in months. Her stomach churned, a sickening mix of pain and intuition. She caught the name on the screen, Victoria, before he angled it away, shielding it like a treasure. Gavin, she said, her voice barely a breath. I need you here. He slipped the phone into his pocket, his movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. I'll be right back, he said, adjusting his tie as if heading to a meeting, not standing in the room where his child was about to be born. The nurse's eyes narrowed, her hand pausing on the monitor. She's close, sir. You might miss it. But Gavin was already moving toward the door, his steps light, purposeful. 5 minutes, he said, his voice carrying the breezy assurance of a man who believed he could dictate time itself. The door clicked shut behind him, and the room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in around Aisha's ragged breasts. She lay back, her vision blurring as another contraction gripped her. Her fingers curled into the sheets, seeking something solid, something real. The nurse's hand brushed her arm, warm and steady. You're doing fine, sweetheart, she murmured, but Aisha barely heard her. Her mind was on Gavin, on the way his smile had lit up for someone else, on the name glowing on his screen. Victoria. The word was a splinter under her skin, sharp and persistent. She'd always known he was ambitious, chasing a life bigger than their modest apartment, their quiet dinners. But she'd thought, hoped, he'd see her as part of that dream, not a weight to shed. Her throat burned, a sob threatening to break free, but she swallowed it down. Not here. Not now. Malik deserved better than her tears. The rain slowed outside, a faint patter against the glass. But inside, the storm was just beginning. Aisha's eyes drifted to the door, willing it to open, willing Gavin to walk back through with the warmth she'd once known in him. But the seconds stretched, each one a pulse of doubt. Her fingers tightened around the bedrail, her resolve hardening like steel in a forge. Whatever came next, she would face it. For Malik. For herself. The monitor beeped, steady and insistent, a reminder of the life about to arrive. And as another contraction surged, Aisha let out a low, primal sound. Not of pain, but of defiance. Gavin might have walked away, but she was still here, still fighting. And that, she knew, was only the beginning. Aisha's breath came in jagged gasps, each one a battle against the fire ripping through her abdomen. The hospital room pulsed with the rhythm of her labor, the monitor's steady beep a metronome to her pain. Her fingers clawed at the damp sheets, knuckles straining white, as she fought to anchor herself in the chaos. The nurse's voice, calm and weathered, drifted through the haze. Push when you feel it, honey. You're almost there. But Aisha's eyes were locked on the door, still swinging from Gavin's exit, its soft thud echoing like a gavel in her chest. She called his name again, a whisper lost in the sterile air, her throat raw from effort. No answer. Only the rain's faint murmur outside and the relentless grip of another contraction. Her vision blurred, sweat stinging her eyes, but she refused to let the tears spill. Not for him, not now. Malik was coming, and she would not break before he arrived. The door creaked open, and her heart lurched. Hope, fragile and unbidden, flickered in her chest. But it wasn't just Gavin. He stepped inside, his posture stiff, his tie still pristine, despite the damp chaos of the storm outside. Behind him stood a woman, tall and sharp-edged, her pale skin glowing under the fluorescent lights. Victoria Whitmore. Aisha knew her instantly, though they'd never met. The tailored navy suit, the diamond studs catching the light, the cool confidence in her stride. It was all exactly as Gavin's late-night stories had painted her. His boss, his muse, his escape. Aisha's breath caught, not from pain, but from the weight of their presence, side by side, as if she were the intruder in her own life. Gavin's eyes met hers for a fleeting second, then slid away, settling on the floor. Victoria's gaze, however, was unflinching, her lips curving into a smile that was all edges, no warmth. Aisha, she said, her voice smooth as polished glass, you look resilient. The word landed like a slap, laced with condescension. Aisha's nails bit into her palms, her jaw tightening as another contraction surged, forcing a low groan from her lips. She wanted to fire back, to strip that smugness from Victoria's face, but her body demanded focus. She gripped the bedrail, riding the wave, her eyes never leaving the pair. Gavin cleared his throat, stepping forward, his hands clasped like a man delivering bad news at a boardroom table. Aisha, we need to talk. His voice was steady, rehearsed, but his fingers twitched, betraying a flicker of unease. This isn't working. Us. It hasn't for a while. Her pulse roared in her ears, drowning out the monitor's beep. She stared at him, her vision narrowing until the room was just his face. Those familiar hazel eyes now cold, distant, like a stranger's. Not working? She managed, her voice a hoarse rasp. I'm having your son Gavin, right now. He flinched barely, but enough for her to see the crack in his resolve. Victoria shifted, her heels clicking softly against the linoleum, a sound that grated against Aisha's nerves. Let's be honest, Victoria said, her tone clipped, professional. You're holding him back. Gavin deserves more than this. Her hand gestured vaguely toward Aisha, the bed, the monitors, as if they were all beneath consideration. Aisha's chest burned, not just from the contraction, but from the audacity of this woman standing in her pain, judging her life. Get out, she said, her voice low, trembling with fury. Both of you. The nurse who had been adjusting the IV spun around, her face a mask of outrage. This is a delivery room, not a conference hall. Out, now. Her finger jabbed toward the door, but Victoria didn't budge. Her eyes locked on Aisha, assessing, almost amused. Gavin pulled a folded paper from his jacket, his movements deliberate, like a man signing a contract. It's done, Aisha, he said, sliding the document onto the bedside table. Divorce papers. Sign them when you're ready. His voice faltered on the last word, but he didn't look back as he turned toward Victoria. Aisha's gaze fell to the paper, the ink stark against the white, a finality she hadn't seen coming. Her hands trembled, not from pain but from the betrayal slicing through her, sharper than any labor pang. She wanted to scream, to tear the paper apart, but another contraction hit, forcing her to grip the rails and breathe through clenched teeth. Her body was splitting, but her heart was shattering. Victoria leaned closer, her perfume sharp and invasive, like a warning. You'll be fine, Aisha, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Women like you always are. Resilient, right? She straightened, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve, and nodded to Gavin. We're done here. Gavin hesitated, his hand lingering on the doorframe, his eyes flicking to Aisha for a fraction of a second. She saw it then, the flicker of guilt, buried under ambition, under Victoria's spell. But it wasn't enough. He followed Victoria out, the door swinging shut behind them, leaving only the echo of their steps. The nurse's hand found Aisha's, warm and firm. You don't need him, she said, her voice a quiet anchor. You hear me? You've got this. Aisha nodded, but the words felt distant, drowned by the roar of her own heartbeat. She pushed, her body demanding everything she had, her mind replaying Gavin's cold detachment, Victoria's smug dismissal. Resilient. The word burned, a taunt she'd turn into a weapon. As the next contraction surged, she let out a primal cry, not just for Malik, but for herself, for the strength she'd need to rise from this. The monitor beeped faster, the nurse's voice urging her on. Aisha's world narrowed to the pain, the purpose, the life about to emerge. Gavin was gone, but she was still here, still fighting. And as the rain softened outside, she vowed silently, fiercely, that this betrayal would not define her. It would forge her. Aisha's chest heaved, her breath shallow and ragged, as the final push tore through her. A cry, sharp, piercing, alive, cut through the sterile hum of the hospital room. Malik, her son. The nurse lifted him, slick and squirming, his tiny fists flailing against the world he'd just entered. Aisha's arms trembled as she reached for him, her fingers brushing his warm, fragile skin. His wail softened to a whimper, and she pressed him to her chest, his heartbeat a faint drum against her own. Tears burned her eyes, not from pain, but from the weight of this moment, pure, untainted hers. The nurse's voice was soft, steady. He's perfect, Mama. You did it. Aisha nodded, her throat too tight for words. She traced Malik's cheek, memorizing the curve, the softness, grounding herself in his existence. Gavin's absence, Victoria's venom, the divorce papers on the table, They faded, if only for a breath, under the gravity of her son. But the world didn't wait. Her phone buzzed on the bedside table, insistent, pulling her back. She ignored it at first, her focus locked on Malik's fluttering eyelids. Another buzz, then another. The nurse glanced at it, her brow creasing. "You want me to check that?" Aisha shook her head, her fingers tightening around Malik. "No, it can wait." It couldn't. She knew who it was. Dr. Lena Carter, her partner in the vaccine project, was the one secret she'd kept from Gavin. The project that could save millions. The one she'd poured her soul into while he chased Victoria's promises. Aisha reached for the phone, her movements slow, deliberate, as if moving through water. The screen glowed. "We need to talk. Investor meeting in 48 hours. Don't miss this." Her stomach twisted. She'd been dodging Lena's calls, her mind fractured by Gavin's betrayal. She typed a reply, her thumbs clumsy, her words curt. "I'll be there." But as she hit send, doubt clawed at her. Could she do this? Lead a meeting? Pitch to investors when her world had just imploded? Malik stirred, his tiny hand curling around her finger, and she felt a flicker of steel in her chest. She had to. Hours later, in the dim light of her mother's apartment, Aisha sat on a worn couch, Malik cradled against her shoulder. The air smelled of sage and old wood, a comfort that grounded her. Her mother, Grace, moved quietly in the kitchen, her braids swaying as she stirred a pot of stew. "You eat yet?" Grace asked, her voice a low command. "Not hungry," Aisha murmured, her eyes fixed on Malik's sleeping face. Grace snorted, setting a bowl in front of her anyway. "You're no good to that boy if you starve." Aisha's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. Grace was a rock, unyielding. The kind of woman who'd raised her to bend but never break. She needed that now, more than ever. Her phone buzzed again. Lena, this time with a sharper edge. "Your slides were a mess. Fix them by tomorrow." Aisha's heart sank. She'd sent a draft presentation last week, half finished, her focus shattered by Gavin's late nights and her own looming labor. She'd thought she had time. She was wrong. She opened her laptop, the screen's glow harsh against her tired eyes. Malik's soft breaths anchored her as she scrolled through the slides. Disjointed, incomplete, a reflection of her fractured state. She tried to edit, but her mind kept replaying Gavin's voice. "It's done, Aisha." Victoria's smirk. The divorce papers. Her fingers froze on the keyboard, her chest tightening until she could barely breathe. Grace's hand settled on her shoulder, warm, steady. "You're stronger than this," she said, her voice cutting through the fog. "Whatever he did, it's his shame, not yours." Aisha's eyes burned, but she nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She turned back to the laptop, forcing herself to type, to focus, but each word felt like lifting stone. Then a notification pinged, a file from her cloud drive, one she hadn't opened in weeks. She clicked it, her breath catching as she scanned the contents. Early notes on the vaccine, ideas she'd shared with Gavin in fleeting moments of trust. Notes he'd asked about, too eagerly, before brushing them off as too ambitious. Her pulse quickened. Had he taken them? Shared them with Victoria? The thought was a cold blade in her gut. She scrolled further, her eyes narrowing. There it was, a formula, deliberately flawed, one she'd left in the file as a precaution, a trap for anyone who might steal it. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Gavin had always underestimated her, seen her as a supportive wife, not the strategist. If he'd given those notes to Victoria, they were building on a lie. Malik whimpered, pulling her back. She rocked him gently, her mind racing. She could fix the slides, nail the meeting, and protect her project. But this betrayal in her work, not just her heart, lit a fire in her. She wasn't just fighting for Malik now, or for herself. She was fighting for everything she'd built, everything Gavin thought she couldn't. Grace set a mug of tea beside her, her eyes sharp, knowing. "You gonna let him take this from you too?" she asked, her voice low, challenging. Aisha's jaw tightened, her fingers curling into a fist. "No," she said, the word a vow, sharp and unyielding. She turned back to the laptop, her hands steady now, typing with purpose. The rain had stopped outside, but inside a storm was brewing, one she'd unleash when the time was right. Aisha's fingers flew across the keyboard, the soft clatter a counterpoint to Malik's gentle snores against her chest. The glow of her laptop screen cast shadows on her mother's living room walls, each flicker a reminder of the hours slipping away. Her slides were sharper now, the data streamlined, the vision clear. A vaccine to save millions, starting with the underserved communities she'd grown up knowing too well. But her jaw clenched as she worked, the memory of Gavin's betrayal a pulse in her veins. He'd taken her notes, her ideas, and handed them to Victoria like they were his to give. The thought burned, but it also fueled her, each keystroke a defiance. Her phone buzzed, Lena's name flashing. "You're late," Lena's voice crackled through, sharp but not unkind. "Investors are antsy. You ready?" Aisha's throat tightened. "I will be," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She glanced at Malik, his tiny chest rising and falling, and felt a surge of resolve. She'd fixed the slides, but the meeting was tomorrow, and the stakes were higher than ever. Failure wasn't an option, not with Victoria circling, not with Gavin's betrayal still raw. She closed the laptop, her eyes stinging from fatigue. Grace's apartment was quiet now, the scent of sage lingering like a promise. Aisha stood, cradling Malik, and paced to the window. The city sprawled below, its lights smudged by the after-rain haze. Somewhere out there, Gavin was living his new life, basking in Victoria's world of glass towers and power plays. Aisha's lip curled. Let him. She was building something bigger. Across town, Gavin leaned against a marble bar, a glass of bourbon in hand. Victoria's penthouse glowed with wealth, crystal chandeliers, sleek furniture, the kind of place that made him feel like he'd finally arrived. But her voice, cool and precise, cut through his thoughts. "You're distracted," she said, swirling her wine. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, pinned him. "That's not useful." He forced a smile, the kind that had always worked on clients. "Just adjusting," he said, but his fingers tightened around the glass. Victoria's world was intoxicating, but it came with strings, her expectations, her control. She'd been distant since they left the hospital, her questions about Aisha's project sharper, more probing. He'd given her the notes, sure, but now she was pushing for more, details he didn't have. His stomach churned. Had he miscalculated? Back at Grace's, Aisha sat with Dr. Jamal, her old college friend and now her lead scientist. His laptop was open, charts and formulas glowing on the screen. "This is it," he said, his voice low, excited. "The vaccine's ready for trials, but we need funding. Big funding." Isha nodded, her mind racing. She'd secured a small grant from a nonprofit, enough to start her company, but it was a drop in the bucket. The investor meeting tomorrow could change everything, if she could convince them. Jamal leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "You sure about keeping this quiet? If Victoria's sniffing around?" "She is," Aisha said, her voice hard. She told him about the stolen notes, the flawed formula she'd planted. Jamal's laugh was sharp, approving. "You're ruthless," he said, and she almost smiled. Ruthless wasn't the word she'd use. Strategic, maybe. Surviving. She opened her laptop again, pulling up the decoy file she'd left for Gavin. The formula was close enough to look real, but broken in ways only an expert would catch. If Victoria was using it, she was already failing. Aisha's lips pressed into a thin line. She'd known Gavin was ambitious, but she hadn't expected him to steal from her. The betrayal stung deeper than his leaving, a violation of the trust she'd once poured into him. Jamal's voice broke her thoughts. "You're carrying too much," he said, his tone softer now. "Let me handle the tech side. You focus on the pitch." His hand brushed hers, a fleeting gesture of support, but Aisha pulled back, her walls still up. She wasn't ready for anyone to get close, not after Gavin. "I'm fine," she said, her voice clipped, but her eyes softened. "Thanks." Across the city, Gavin's phone buzzed, Victoria summoning him to her office. He arrived to find her pacing, her usual composure fraying. "Your wife's project," she snapped, tossing a tablet onto the desk. "It's garbage. The formula doesn't work." Her eyes bored into him, searching for weakness. Gavin's mouth went dry. He'd sworn the notes were solid, but now doubt crept in. Had Aisha played him? "You assured me this was gold," Victoria said, her voice low, dangerous. "If you're wasting my time—" She didn't finish, but the threat hung heavy. Gavin's pulse raced. He needed to fix this, to prove his worth, but a flicker of unease stirred. Aisha had always been smarter than he'd given her credit for. Back at Grace's, Aisha stood over Malik's crib, watching his tiny chest rise and fall. Her phone pinged, a confirmation from the nonprofit, a small lifeline for her company. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of the day settle. Gavin's betrayal, Victoria's arrogance, the stolen notes, they were all fuel now, kindling for the fire in her chest. Tomorrow she'd face the investors, not as the woman Gavin left, but as the one who'd outsmarted him. She turned to the window, the city's lights brighter now, sharper. Her reflection stared back, resolute, unbroken. Victoria thought she was resilient. Gavin thought she was small. They were both wrong. She was a force, and she was only beginning. Aisha's breath caught as she adjusted Malik's blanket, his soft snores a quiet anchor in the dim light of Grace's apartment. Her laptop sat open, the investor pitch polished to a razor's edge, but her pulse thrummed with unease. Victoria was out there, circling, her claws already sunk into the stolen notes Aisha had rigged to fail. The thought sparked a grim satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. She needed to protect her vaccine, her company, her son, everything Gavin had tried to tear away. Her phone vibrated, Lena's name flashing again. "They're expecting a showstopper tomorrow," Lena said, her voice tight with urgency. "Don't choke, Aisha. This is our shot." Aisha's jaw tightened, her fingers curling into her palm. "I won't," she said, her tone sharp, final. She hung up, her eyes drifting to Malik. For him, she'd be unstoppable. Across the city, Gavin leaned against the window of Victoria's penthouse, the skyline glittering like a promise he was starting to doubt. His bourbon sat untouched, the ice melting into amber pools. Victoria paced behind him, her heels clicking like a metronome, her voice slicing through the air. "You're slipping," she said, her eyes narrowing as she stopped, arms crossed. "I need results, Gavin, not excuses." He turned, forcing a smile, but his throat was dry. "I gave you everything I had on her project," he said, his voice low, defensive. "You said it was enough." Victoria's laugh was sharp, cutting. "Enough? It's a dud. Your wife played you." Her words landed like a fist, and Gavin's chest tightened. Aisha playing with him. The idea gnawed, a splinter of doubt burrowing deeper. He'd always seen her as steady, predictable, but now, had he misread her all along? Victoria stepped closer, her perfume sharp, invasive. "Fix this," she said, her voice low, a warning wrapped in silk. "Or you're out." She turned away, her phone already in hand, texting someone else, dismissing him without a glance. Gavin's fingers twitched, the weight of her words pressing against his ribs. He needed her power, her world, but the ground beneath him felt less solid by the day. Back at Grace's, Aisha sat with Jamal, their laptops casting a soft glow across the cramped dining table. He pointed to a line of code on his screen, his voice steady but urgent. "We've got the trial data locked, but we need to secure the servers. If Victoria's as ruthless as you say—" He trailed off, his eyes meeting hers, searching. "She is," Aisha said, her voice hard. She opened a file showing Jamal the decoy formula's metadata. "She's using it, but it's costing her. Time, money, credibility." Her lips curved, not a smile but a blade's edge. She'd planted that trap months ago, a fail-safe born of instinct, and now it was paying off. But the victory was fleeting. Her phone pinged, a security alert from her company's server. Someone was probing, testing the firewalls. "Victoria." Jamal leaned back, his brow furrowing. "She's not playing, Aisha. We need to counter this. Now." Aisha nodded, her fingers already moving, setting up a honeypot, a fake server to lure the hacker. Her heart raced, not with fear but with focus. This was her domain, her fight. She'd outmaneuver them both. Meanwhile, Gavin stood outside Victoria's office. his ear pressed to the door, catching fragments of her phone call. "Find out what she's hiding," Victoria snapped, her voice low, venomous. "I want her project buried." Gavin's stomach churned. She was talking about Aisha, about the vaccine he'd dismissed as a pipe dream. But now, with Victoria's desperation seeping through, he saw it differently. Aisha wasn't just surviving, she was winning. He slipped away, his mind racing. Victoria's plan was bigger than he'd thought, and he was just a pawn. His fingers brushed the phone in his pocket, Aisha's number still there, a ghost of their past. He could warn her, could try to make amends, but the thought died as quickly as it came. She'd never trust him again. And why should she? He'd chosen this. At Grace's, Aisha's phone buzzed again. A message from a nonprofit investor, confirming a follow-up meeting. A lifeline, small but real. She exhaled, her shoulders easing for the first time in days. Malik stirred in his crib, and she crossed to him, brushing a finger along his cheek. His warmth steadied her, a reminder of why she fought. Not just for him, but for the communities her vaccine would reach, the lives she'd save. Jamal's voice broke the silence. "You're doing too much alone," he said, his tone soft but firm. "Let me take some of the weight." His hand hovered near hers, an offer of more than just help, but Aisha pulled back, her walls still high. "I've got it," she said, her voice clipped, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of gratitude. She wasn't ready to lean on anyone, not after Gavin's knife. Outside, the city hummed, its pulse relentless. Aisha stood by the window, her reflection sharp against the glass. Victoria's probe had failed, caught in her trap, but it was only a matter of time before the next move. Gavin's betrayal, Victoria's schemes, they were fuel now, sharpening her resolve. Tomorrow's meeting would be her battlefield, and she'd walk in armed with more than just slides. She'd walk in with the fire of a woman who'd been underestimated and survived. Aisha's heels clicked against the polished marble of the conference room, each step a pulse of defiance. Her suit, tailored in dark, hugged her frame like armor, and her eyes burned with a clarity that silenced the room. The investors, gray-haired men and sharp-eyed women, watched her, their gazes a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Malik's face flashed in her mind, his tiny hand curling around her finger, grounding her. She set her laptop on the table, her movements deliberate, and began. "This vaccine," she said, her voice steady, resonant, "will save millions, starting with those the world forgets." The screen behind her lit up, data and projections weaving a story of hope and precision. Her words were sharp, cutting through the room's stale air, each statistic a brick in the fortress she was building. Lena sat in the corner, her nods subtle but fierce, urging her on. Aisha's heart pounded, not from fear but from the weight of this moment, her chance to rewrite everything Gavin and Victoria had tried to steal. Halfway through, a man in a pinstripe suit leaned forward, his brow creased. "Ambitious," he said, his tone clipped, "but risky. Why should we trust you?" Aisha's lips curved, not a smile but a challenge. "Because I have already outsmarted the competition," she said, clicking to a slide that detailed her trial's success. She didn't mention Victoria, didn't need to. The numbers spoke louder than names. Across town, Gavin stood in Victoria's office, the air thick with her rage. Papers littered her desk, her tablet glowing with failed test results from Aisha's stolen formula. "You swore this was solid," Victoria hissed, her eyes boring into him, cold and unyielding. "Now I'm bleeding money, and you're useless." Gavin's mouth went dry, his fingers twitching at his sides. He'd thought Aisha's notes were his ticket, his leverage. Now they were his noose. "I didn't know," he said, his voice thin, cracking. Victoria's laugh was a blade, sharp and merciless. "You didn't know your own wife?" She stepped closer, her perfume sharp, suffocating. "I'm done cleaning up your mess, Gavin. Fix it or you're out. For good." Her words landed like a slap, and he felt the ground shift beneath him. Aisha hadn't just survived. She'd played them both. Back at the conference, Aisha's voice rose, her final slide a bold vision. Vaccines for Africa, for the underserved, for the forgotten. The room was silent, then erupted in murmurs, nods, and hands scribbling notes. The pinstripe man leaned back, his skepticism replaced by something like respect. "We'll fund it," he said, and the words hit Aisha like a wave, relief and triumph crashing together. $20 billion. Her company, her dream was real, but the victory was bittersweet. As she packed her laptop, Lena pulled her aside, her voice low. "We've got a problem. Someone's still probing our servers." Aisha's jaw tightened, her mind flashing to Victoria. She'd anticipated this, set traps, but the persistence gnawed at her. "I've got it covered," she said, her tone hard, but her pulse raced. She'd won the deal, but the war wasn't over. That night, at a gala celebrating the deal, Aisha stood alone by a window, the city's lights sprawling below. Her phone buzzed, a message from her security team. Hacker caught, traced to Whitmore Industries. Aisha's lips pressed into a thin line. She'd planted a digital lure, a fake server, and Victoria had taken the bait. But the real twist came in an email from Lena. "Feds are investigating Whitmore for fraud. Your trap gave them the evidence." Aisha's breath caught, her fingers tightening around the phone. She'd done more than protect her project. She'd turned Victoria's greed against her. The gala's chatter faded as she imagined Victoria's face, her empire crumbling. Aisha didn't smile, but her eyes burned with a quiet fire. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. Meanwhile, Gavin watched the gala from a bar across town, the TV flashing Aisha's face. "Aisha Coleman," the anchor said, "CEO of Horizon Biotech, secures $20 billion deal." Gavin's glass froze halfway to his lips, his chest tightening. Her smile on the screen, poised, unyielding, cut deeper than Victoria's scorn. He'd left her, thinking she was small, but she'd been building an empire while he chased shadows. His phone buzzed, Victoria summoning him. He arrived to find her office in chaos, her face pale, her hands shaking as she hung up with her lawyer. "You idiot," she spat, her voice venomous. "Your wife set me up. The feds are at my door." Gavin's stomach dropped, his mind reeling. Aisha had outplayed them, not just with the formula, but with something bigger, something he couldn't grasp. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You're done here," she said, and the door slammed shut in his face. Aisha stepped onto the gala's balcony, the night air cool against her skin. Malik was with Grace, safe, loved. Her phone buzzed again, a photo from Grace. Malik sleeping, his tiny hand clutching a blanket. Aisha's heart softened, but her resolve didn't waver. She'd won this battle, but Victoria's fall was only the beginning. Gavin was still out there, and she knew he'd come crawling back. Let him. She was ready. The city pulsed below, alive, relentless. Aisha lifted her chin, her reflection fierce in the glass. She wasn't the woman Gavin had left in that hospital room. She was something more, unbreakable, unstoppable, and she was only getting started. Aisha's breath misted in the cool evening air as she stood at the iron gates of her new estate. Malik balanced on her hip. The house loomed behind her, all glass and sharp angles, a testament to the empire she'd built from the ashes Gavin left behind. Her phone was silent now, the victory of the $20 billion deal still humming in her veins, but her eyes were fixed on the figure approaching the gate. Gavin. His coat was rumpled, his steps hesitant, a cheap bouquet of daisies clutched in his hand. The sight of him twisted something in her chest. Not pain, not anymore, but a cold, hard clarity. He stopped at the intercom, his finger hovering over the button. "Aisha," he said, his voice crackling through the speaker, thin and unsteady. "Can we talk?" Malik stirred, his small hand tugging at her collar, and she shifted him, her jaw tightening. She pressed the button, her voice low, controlled. "Why are you here, Gavin?" The gate buzzed open, and he stepped through, his eyes darting to the house, the manicured lawn, the life he'd never imagined her having. He looked smaller, diminished, the sheen of Victoria's world gone. "You look, different," he said, his gaze lingering on her cream sweater, her poised stance. "Good. You look good." Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes stripping him bare. "Say what you came to say." Her tone was ice, each word a barrier he'd never cross. Malik's fingers curled into her sweater, grounding her, keeping her steady. Gavin cleared his throat, holding out the daisies like an offering. I messed up, he said, his voice low, faltering. I shouldn't have left you. Not like that. Not at all. His eyes flicked to Malik, softening for a moment, but Aisha's gaze didn't waver. I want to make it right. For you. For him. Her chest tightened, not with longing but with the memory of his coldness in that hospital room, Victoria's smirk at his side. She shifted Malik, her voice steady, cutting. You think flowers fix that? You left me when I was breaking, Gavin. You signed me away like a bad deal. Her words were a blade, precise, and she saw him flinch, his shoulders hunching. I know, he said, his voice cracking. I was wrong. I saw you on TV, Aisha. The deal, the company. You're incredible. I'm proud of you. He stepped closer, his eyes pleading. I want another chance to be a family. Aisha's laugh was sharp, bitter, slicing through the quiet. A family? She shook her head, her eyes blazing. You don't get to walk back in because I won. You left because you thought I was small, Gavin. You chose her. Her voice dropped, low and dangerous. And you stole from me. His face paled, his hand dropping the daisies to his side. I didn't, he started, but her look silenced him. Don't, she said. I know you gave my notes to Victoria. I let you, Gavin. I planted the flaws in those files. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed yourself. Gavin's mouth opened, then closed, his eyes wide with the dawning horror of her words. She'd played him, outsmarted him from the start, and the weight of it crushed the last of his bravado. Aisha, he whispered, I didn't know what I was losing. You still don't, she said, her voice steady but laced with steel. She adjusted Malik, her eyes softening as they fell on her son, then hardening again as they met Gavin's. Malik isn't yours, Gavin. He never was. The words landed like a blow, and she saw his knees buckle slightly, his breath catching. I chose a donor. You were never ready to be a father. His face crumpled, the daisies slipping from his hand to the gravel. You can't mean that, he said, his voice barely a whisper, but Aisha's gaze was unyielding. I mean every word, she said. I survived without you. More than survived. I built this. She gestured to the house, the life behind her, her voice rising. You don't get to claim it now. Gavin's eyes glistened, but she felt no pity, only the steady burn of her own strength. I could give you a job, she said, her tone cold, deliberate. Something small at Horizon. You'd see Malik sometimes. Earn your way back if you can. She paused, watching his face twist with pride, with shame. But you won't, will you? He shook his head, his jaw tight, his voice barely audible. I can't do that. He stepped back, the daisies falling to the ground, forgotten. I'm sorry, Aisha, he said, his voice breaking. For everything. She didn't answer. She turned, carrying Malik back toward the house, the gate clanging shut behind her. The sound was final, a door closing on the past. Inside, she set Malik in his crib, her fingers lingering on his cheek, his warmth anchoring her. Gavin's apology echoed in her mind, but it was hollow, weightless against the life she'd forged. She stood by the window, the city's lights sprawling beyond the estate. Gavin was gone, his car's tail lights fading down the road. She didn't need his regret, didn't need his shadow. She had Malik, her company, her purpose. The fight wasn't over. Victoria's fall was still unfolding, but Aisha was ready, her heart a steady flame, unyielding and fierce. Aisha stood on the rooftop terrace of her estate, the night air cool against her skin, lifting the edges of her silk scarf. Below, the city pulsed, its lights a tapestry of ambition and grit. Malik's laughter echoed from inside, where Grace played with him, his small hands clutching a toy truck. Aisha's lips curved, a quiet warmth settling in her chest. She'd built this, her home, her empire, her peace, not from Gavin's betrayal, but through it, like steel tempered in fire. Her phone sat silent in her hand, no longer buzzing with threats or schemes. Victoria was gone, her empire crumbling under federal indictments, and Gavin was a ghost, fading into the consequences of his choices. She leaned against the railing, her eyes tracing the skyline. The gala tonight was hers, a celebration of Horizon Biotech's first vaccine rollout, free to clinics across sub-Saharan Africa. Her heart swelled at the thought, but it wasn't pride. It was purpose, hard-won, rooted in the communities she'd grown up in, the ones she'd vowed to lift. Her fingers brushed the pendant at her neck, a gift from Grace, etched with a single word: endure. She had. She would. Inside, the house glowed, warm and alive. Jamal stepped onto the terrace, his presence steady, unintrusive. "You ready for the speech?" he asked, his voice low, his eyes catching hers with a warmth that felt like home. Not the rushed, desperate pull of romance, but something deeper: trust, built on years of shared dreams and late-night work sessions. Aisha nodded, her smile soft but sure. "Ready." He lingered, his hand brushing hers, a question unspoken. She didn't pull away this time, but she didn't lean in either. "You don't have to do it all alone," he said, his tone gentle, not pressing. "You know that, right?" Her chest tightened, not with fear but with the weight of possibility. "I know," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm learning." Jamal's smile was small, patient, and he stepped back, giving her space. She appreciated that, his understanding that her walls weren't gone, just lower, cracked open by time and trust. Across the city, Gavin sat in a dimly lit bar, the TV muted above him, flashing news of Victoria's arrest. Her face, once radiant with power, was now grim, cuffed hands barely hidden from the cameras. He'd been cut loose weeks ago, his bank account drained, his apartment repossessed. The bourbon in his hand trembled, his knuckles white around the glass. He'd tried to call Aisha, to beg, to explain, but her number was blocked. Then he'd seen her at the gala on TV, poised, commanding, untouchable. The woman he'd left in a hospital bed was gone, replaced by someone he'd never truly known. His phone buzzed, a text from an old colleague, one he'd ignored for months. "Heard you applied at Horizon. Tough break." Gavin's stomach churned. He'd swallowed his pride, sent a resume to Aisha's company, hoping for a foothold, a chance to see Malik. The rejection had been swift, impersonal, a form email that cut deeper than any of her words at the gate. He'd lost everything: Victoria's world, Aisha's trust, his own future. The glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor, and no one in the bar looked up. Back at the gala, Aisha stepped to the podium, the crowd falling silent. Her dress shimmered, deep indigo catching the light. But it was her presence that held them, unyielding, radiant. "This isn't about profit," she said, her voice clear, resonant. "It's about people, about giving back what the world tried to take." Her eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on a familiar face: Lena, nodding fiercely, and Jamal, standing at the back, his gaze steady. Malik was with Grace, safe, but she felt him in every word, every breath. She spoke of the vaccine, of the clinics it would reach, of the lives it would save. But she didn't speak of Gavin, didn't need to. His shadow was gone, burned away by her light. The applause was thunderous, but she barely heard it, her mind on the work ahead, expanding Horizon, building schools, funding research for the forgotten. As the crowd dispersed, Jamal approached, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You were unstoppable," he said, handing her one. She took it, her fingers brushing his, lingering for a moment. "We're unstoppable," she corrected, her voice soft but firm. He smiled, and for the first time, she let herself imagine a future with him, not as a savior, but as a partner. Later on the terrace, Aisha stood alone again, Malik asleep inside, the city quiet below. She thought of Gavin, of his crumpled daisies, his hollow apologies. There was no bitterness left, only a quiet gratitude for the strength she'd found in his absence. She'd taught Malik to walk, to laugh, and soon she'd teach him the truth. Not of his father's failure, but of her own resilience, of choices that built rather than broke. The stars above were sharp, unyielding, like the path she'd carved. She wasn't alone anymore, not with Grace, Jamal, Lena, and Malik by her side. The road ahead was hers, lined with purpose, not pain. She turned back to the house, her steps light, her heart steady. The door closed behind her, a soft click that echoed with finality, and she knew without a doubt that she was home.